Welcome to the Global Discussion, discussions with creators, leaders, and thinkers. My name is Simon Hodgkins, and today it's a real pleasure to be joined by Bryan Barletta. Bryan from Sounds Profitable. A lot of people in the podcasting world will know all about Sounds Profitable, but let me hand straight over to Bryan. Maybe just give us the quick intro. Tell us a bit about the world of Sounds Profitable, because it's kind of got a few things bolted on over the years, and it keeps progressing. So over to you, Bryan. Great to see
I
you.
Thank you for having me here. I like Bolted On as a good example because it's funny. It all started primarily as a newsletter, right? I was let go of my role at Megaphone as a product manager there, leading the ad serving side. And what I realized is I love podcasting. I'd been in the space for a while, and I wanted to make sure everybody was educated on it, from the entry level all the way to the C level. So I started writing, and then it started growing. And what I saw was a need for consulting and advocacy and all of these things. It just kept growing and growing and growing. And so to fast forward all of it, today we represent 150 companies and growing as a research and advocacy firm. We do education, we do live events, we do webinars, research, literally everything, consulting for all of these partners. And we do this myself and my partner, Tom Webster, who is easily the face of research and podcasting. And he had an 18-year career at Edison Research. Everybody who's seen research and podcasting is familiar with him. And he came on in June 2022 as my equal partner so that we could build this out further. And so now we have 6 different issues of the newsletter a week to keep people updated on the business of podcasting, some thought leadership stuff for us, and even a roundup version to make it easier for people who maybe don't want a daily version. We're at every major podcasting event. We're taking a big swing at South by Southwest to prove to South by Southwest why podcasting deserves its own 3, 5, 7-day track. And I'm very, very lucky and very proud to be able to do what I do in the space, which is just help people grow the industry through both listenership and monetization.
Thanks, Bryan. And did you think this is where it would end up? I know it's a continual
Not
journey
even,
and it's
yeah, not even a
evolving,
little
but
bit.
yeah, not a bit.
No. When it first started, I mean, I had a 2-year-old at the time. We were trying for our second kid. I turned to my wife and I said, "We're gonna be eating ramen for a bit while I figure out what this is." And now it's been great. I'm absolutely able to pay myself appropriately, and the team, we have 4 people. Manuel and Gavin are on the team, as well as Tom and myself. And we have a very strong and set business that continues to grow in this space, and grew last year, even while the industry kind of had I don't know, a reconfiguration, I would say.
And I want to ask you just something you said there about the newsletters, and obviously starting from the newsletter to what Sounds Profitable is today. But you mentioned quite a lot of newsletters there. So you're obviously developing these sort of different segments, different things. And I'm reminded of somebody like a Jason Calacanis, who I'm sure you know,
With
and
Inside,
his
yeah.
approach to sort of the inside newsletters. Is it
Mhm.
kind of along those lines, or is it different?
I'd say that our content focus is really about the business of podcasting. I think there's a lot of great newsletters out there and relate sources if you are a podcaster or a listener of podcasts. But my mindset is I wanted to give something to the people who have a job in podcasting, and that means like getting a paycheck from Spotify or someone like that as like being an account manager. Also to someone who's decided that their career and their job is to build their podcast company, and they're able to pay themselves, right? Or they want to strive towards that. So I don't mean to be exclusionary on that. And that really shifts our focus. I'm not particularly interested in highlighting the newest microphone from Rode or firmware updates or a value for value podcast app that's out there. Or what I really want to do is highlight people with the things that matter in the business space that allow them to talk to advertisers, to talk to content houses, to talk to people who buy shows and all the aspects of it, to talk about the technical changes. And so our main newsletter started as the Wednesday newsletter, and it's our thought leadership piece. I handle a majority of the consulting, and I love the connecting and the people. So I tend to write less and less as we hit 150 people and continue to grow there. Tom, thankfully, is prolific in his writing and has just been absolutely crushing it. And so he does a lot of that now. Our second newsletter that we started was called The Download, and it was just meant as a recap of all of the things in the business of podcasting that happened that week in 10 minutes or less. What we found is that we were leaving so many articles on the cutting room floor. So we expanded to also have the download as a daily. And so the two newsletter lists we have is the Wednesday and the Fridays, just like the high level, and then the daily being Monday through Thursday. And they're great, right? Because of our setup, we have no advertisements. They're sponsored because we needed help getting this new thing off the ground. And that was really exciting there to work with Spreaker to launch the daily, and then Magellan to launch the recap. And but besides that, there's no advertisements. It just lists our partners. It's right to the news, respectful of everybody's time, and is meant to empower people to win more business, to grow their business, to confidently combat people who are trying to dismiss aspects of podcasting. And I think we have a very unique view there.
So that's a real community with a very specific focuses then.
Oh,
and
yeah.
It obviously, I'm sure it takes a lot of passion and a lot of hard work behind the scenes from what you've described, Bryan.
Yeah, every morning I wake up and I look through about 100 different articles and determine, what are the ones about podcasting that are relevant for us to highlight in a business newsletter? What are the ones that apply pressure on podcasting, whether it's advertising related, content related, or marketing related, and how we spin that story. And then thankfully, Gavin on our team, who's phenomenal, runs content for us. I send those articles with my highlight of why, and then Gavin basically pitches back to me their recap of it. And that's how we've been able to really thrive there.
Yeah, that makes a lot of sense. Thank you for sharing that insight.
Yeah.
That's very helpful. And it's funny, you mentioned, the latest Rode wireless mic, and I went, oh, I had that this morning. There's a new one out. And then you mentioned value for value. I'm going, Adam Curry, Sam Sethi, there's so much out there to grab your attention.
Yeah.
I think the process that you've described there and how they sort of pitch that back to you, and then you can sort of curate what they get and also add some value to that story.
Yeah. And I respect
really working.
I respect a lot of those guys, and I really enjoy what they're doing. I mean, podcasting is open, is free, and we need to push the things on there. But for me, it's a career, right? This isn't an art style, but what I get to do, I don't particularly view myself as creative, but I've always worked in advertising, and I was excited about the world where I could help monetize something that somebody else was creative and excited about. So for me, value for value is interesting, but it's not going to be widespread adopted. I consider myself pretty tech savvy. I don't have a crypto wallet to do any of these things, nor am I particularly interested. When I can pay through Apple Pay, awesome. There's a handful of podcasts that I've listened to that didn't have ads on there, and I would have loved to throw them $10, $20, $30 for the 10 episode run that really entertained me. And I can't even find a buy me a coffee link for these people. So the concept there is neat, but I play in the world where we have to kind of acknowledge what Apple, Spotify, Amazon, and Google are doing. And we need to understand that we built businesses that are beholden to them owning the endpoint and the listener, because that is the primary source of or place where people are consuming content. And that while we can rage against the machine a little bit, we need to pay the bills. And so it's, where is that middle line? And sometimes those things, we have to save our breath, right? We have to think through what we want to talk about and what we want to occupy the minds of the people who are day in and day out growing this industry.
No, that makes sense, Bryan. Thank you. And you mentioned the likes of the Googles of this world and the Spotifys of this world and the Amazons and the big players.
Yeah.
And it brings me on to something I really want to ask you about. And because you guys published an article recently about video podcasts. And I just want to get your take. I know we don't have a lot of time to get into the nitty-gritty of it, but we've seen a shift, haven't we? More and more people are watching their podcast. But you some of your research that you pushed out was that some of it's the same audience, right? These guys are consuming both. It depends on the mood and the, what sort of situation they're in. I found that fascinating because the first time I'd seen that sort of nuanced research. So could you maybe just expand on your thoughts on that?
Yeah, no, I wanna just emphasize that Tom is our primary researcher, and so these things, they're heavy, and I spend a lot of time with him. Tom's far more articulate with them. Should be on the show in the future, basically what we really wanted to focus on is it's easy to dismiss oh, people are confused, they don't know whether to watch it on YouTube or listen to it on a podcast app. We like to dismiss the audience, and what that research really identified is the audience isn't confused. They know what they want to watch, and they know what they want to listen to. They know when and where they want to watch something, and they know when and where they want to listen to something. I forget the exact stats, but the people who watch video podcasts heavily consume audio podcasts as well in specific situations, where not all people who consume audio podcasts watch video podcasts, right? The numbers are definitely shifted more towards the video first people. Things that are super interesting to me about it are what is a video podcast for them and what is competing for attention. When I turn on my TV, when I put on a video on my computer, remember that video is competing with any video content. So it's competing with other shows on YouTube that are built for YouTube. It's competing with all the streaming platforms and everything there. So, one of the interesting things was like the interest in the music category music category of podcasting is pretty high. I mean, it's well ranked. It's even higher in video podcasts, because there's the live footage component of it, of concerts and pictures, and the ability to play some music a little bit differently because of different licensing aspects. And I really like that aspect there too. But one of the things was that for like audio dramas and audio fictions or documentaries or things that are more produced, a lot of the people consuming audio or video podcasts are looking for not even what we're doing right now. This isn't particularly appealing to them. If we were in the same studio and if we are in comfy chairs and nice microphones, that's what appeals to them about a video podcast, a chat show. So if you have a really killer audio drama or true crime, those people are happy to listen to it, whether they're listening to it in the YouTube Music app or on your RSS feed. They differentiate, but they don't necessarily need a video component, because that type of content they can get from streaming services, they can get from other things that build a visual first approach. So it was interesting. I felt it was kind of like permission to not beat yourself up if you run a audio drama network and you need to figure out your YouTube plan.
Yeah, it makes a lot of sense. And I'm thinking of like Diary of a CEO, and the way they have people are investing heavily, aren't they now? A lot of creators in the studio setup for that face-to-face in real life sort of recording experience.
But let's talk about Diary of the CEO, because I think that's a great example. And it also, in my opinion, kind of leads to branded podcasts a little bit. Is I've never listened to it, but I've seen 100 clips from it, because on LinkedIn or on Twitter or Threads or whatever else, like people will share that clip. I know that they're authorities. I know that the people they're talking to are authorities. And that bit of that clip, that 30-second clip, is enough to tell me like these people are intelligent. I now know what they talked about in this episode to agree. Here is something I can latch onto. When someone says like, I'm looking for an interesting podcast about X, while I'm not a download for them, they're lodged in my brain as an authority, and I'll recommend it, right? And this is something we also talk a lot about with branded podcast companies. Like, not all of this is about the downloads. Sometimes it's about authority creation and asset creation and promotion and marketing and other channels that lead to other things, live events, brand recognition, you name it. So getting someone to download your podcast or consume the whole episode is not always doesn't always have to be the goal. And there's a lot of really interesting things you can do there when you are visually appealing and concisely educating the audience you're trying to get in front of.
And just to follow up on the brand question, then, if I can,
yeah,
we've seen, like you mentioned, true crime, which is, I think, in the US market, I know it's extremely popular.
Yep.
In the UK market and maybe some of Europe, it is still very popular, maybe not quite as much. But then I've seen some great crossover between, say, terrestrial television or traditional broadcast, where they've got the 6-8 episode series, and yet it's backed up by a podcast, and the podcast just explodes. And so brands are starting to pay real attention to that, aren't they? And starting to invest in that. But then my other question to you is, some brands don't seem to have got the memo and are not even in this space at all. I'm just wondering on where you're when it comes to this, the brands, with a nod to some of that other research Sounds Profitable did about brands in the podcast industry.
Yeah. One thing I do want to just quickly point out to everybody listening is that all of our research is completely free. It is, directed by ourselves with input from our sponsors, but they don't have any editorial, like they can't say this, we disagree with this, we want to take it down. It's all available for free on our website, at soundsprofitable.com. So please check it out. Tom, we have the recordings, the live presentations of Tom, walking through it. I highly recommend that. He is such a good presenter on it. The branded content's so interesting. And I respect it in so many ways. And I was talking to someone earlier this morning about it. We're talking about like an alcohol brand and how they were talking about could that alcohol brand become like basically turn this podcast by sponsoring it or licensing it into a branded podcast, and why that would be appealing. And we looked, and that alcohol brand has like an okay Twitter following, an okay Facebook following. Like nobody cares about it on LinkedIn. They don't have a newsletter. There's nothing really on their website that would bring me back to it other than like trying to find what stores cover it. So they don't have content, right? But they have an audience and they're posting great numbers sales wise, and they're growing and people are aware of the brand. So yeah, you can just buy ads and that's neat. But what happens if you sponsored or supported the creation of content that your core audience and people like your core audience that are buying your product were interested in, and now had that funnel? You had a reason for them to subscribe to your newsletter, to go to your website, to subscribe to this podcast, to follow you on other areas, because you're sharing those social clips that, again, you might not watch or listen to the full episode, but you see that clip and you associate them, that brand, now with something intelligent or something entertaining or all of that. Branded podcasts, even just as a form of asset creation, is so underutilized, and it's wild. I really think that it is going to be one of the biggest booms and continue to be, because authentic content creation is tough. And we think a lot, like I like to think a lot. I have a 2 and a 5-year-old, about advertising towards kids. And I always bring up like He-Man was an ad to sell He-Man toys, right? Like these cartoons, Transformers, all the Power Rangers. I'm still obsessed with it. I'm 38 years old. They made the show with the intention of selling you the toys, right? It did, the advertisements in it were great as well. Like that made them money, but like let's not forget that the idea, soap operas, right, were built to sell things. We're going to get back to that, because nobody just wants to hear an ad from a brand or see an ad from a brand. They want to believe that that brand aligns with them, understands them, and wants to entertain and engage them. It's why brands sponsor concerts and festivals and things like that. A podcast is just another way to have a touch point with that person, potentially weekly, bi-weekly, that is honestly, in the grand scheme of things, pretty low cost.
Oh, 100%. I couldn't agree more. And I like one of the terms that you used on the research there on the Sounds Profitable website was about that ultimately this branded content becomes a force multiplier, meaning that, it's great for the podcast, it's great for the brand, it's a win-win for everybody. And people resonate with that, and it moves them on to other things, and it just grows almost organically. And as you say, you're not paying the same price you would for this as you would to, run an advert during the Super Bowl, for example.
Yeah,
this is relatively cost-effective media.
And you probably are getting that, like, even if you do host endorsed, or if the host says it's sponsored by, and that host is a celebrity or a person of note, it's probably cheaper than if you had them come to your studio or do a voice recording for you for an ad that you could run elsewhere. Like, where you're getting access to talent and influencers at likely a rate that is not affordable in other mediums.
100%. Well, look, before we run out of time, Bryan, is there anything else that maybe we haven't touched on, or maybe something we have touched on that you want to double down on, that you'd like to share with our worldwide audience here today? And secondly, and obviously, what's the best way for people to get on these newsletters? Is it just to head over to soundsprofitable.com?
Yeah, I think the best way to be in touch with us is soundsprofitable.com. Subscribe to the newsletters. If you hit reply, it seriously goes to me. I have infinite time to help people out, right? There's I can't necessarily walk people through everything, but I will always respond. I will point you in the direction of more information. I'll connect you with people if I can. I want to be here for people who take this seriously and want to grow the industry and their business, right? Like, both sides need to be important. Again, all of our content is free on the site. It's all ad-free. It's all provided thanks and support from our partners. So definitely check that out. Well, we're talking about clips, right? We were talking about the value of marketing assets. So let's leave with one. Let's give you one to work with here. We talked about this a little bit before we started recording, about the word podcast and RSS feeds. And I know we didn't get a time to touch on it, so I wanted to just share my thoughts on it. Podcasting is an incredibly limiting word. Every single thing, this recording, all the way up to things that win Tribeca Podcast Festival awards, that are heavily produced and require traveling all the world, fit under the word podcasting. Sounds Profitable's podcast gets a couple hundred downloads an episode. Some of their podcasts out there, they get millions of downloads an episode. That word runs a wide gamut. By limiting ourselves to what podcasting is, by saying it's only things on RSS, only things that are open and available everywhere, only things that are audio only, we shut off the creative potential of this. We're influencers, right? This is an influencer industry, all aspects of it. It needs to be versatile. Audio has a lot of room to grow. Podcasting has managed to build out a killer area. It is a bad idea to close that off. It is a bad idea to shame somebody who managed to sell their show to Audible and now it's an Audible exclusive only in that app, or a Spotify exclusive when that was happening, or YouTube exclusive because they want to do it there. The word is malleable and people should not be limited to how they want to use it. There are podcasts in the HBO Max app that you can't access elsewhere, that you need to leave the screen on your phone because they can't figure out how to play without the screen on. That's a podcast. It doesn't matter what anybody says about the technical capabilities there. That's a podcast, that's audio content, whatever it wants to be. If we limit ourselves, podcasting will become a dead word and we'll figure out a new word to define it, and build cool content that you're proud of, that you can run a business off of. Or honestly, the other divide of it is that you just have fun. Just be creative in some audio format. Don't worry about what the nerds say.
Love it, Bryan. Absolutely like that a lot. And that brings me nicely to the end of our time today here on the Global Discussion. And I want to thank everybody who's been watching or listening to this episode around the world. Make sure they follow, like, subscribe, do all the things we need them to do to help support the shows. And hopefully they'll join me back here for some more discussions with creatives and leaders and thinkers just like Bryan. But make sure you head over, if you do nothing else, head over to soundsprofitable.com. Check it out. There's some really valuable information there. Thank you, Bryan. Real pleasure to talk to you again today.
Thanks for having me.